Okay, we are live, and here we are with the roundtable hangout discussion. Jim Brown and Lauren Chihardi. Political discussion, and we have some hot news courtesy of SMOR, which is Southern Media and Opinion Research, Bernie Pincinat. On Louisiana state politics, his new poll, his fall poll, it just came out today. And we'll have Bernie Pincinat. He's going to do a hangout hopefully tomorrow or the next day or on Monday. But for right now, Lawrence, you've had just an opportunity. These numbers just came out, and you've had just an opportunity to take a look at it. Just in general, if you may, why don't you just tell me what is your general reaction, please?
Well, overall, you have to categorize it as to who you want to look at. I mean, Governor Jindal, for example, in this poll is doing slightly better than he did previously. But slightly better is still not great. And of course, it all gets back, I think, to all the out-of-state travel that he's done, as well as the massive cuts that have been made to health care and higher education during the past few years. So that's affected him tremendously. Of particular interest, I think, to a lot of people is the upcoming U.S. Senate race. And this survey clearly shows that if the election were held at this time, that Senator Landrieu very likely would not get reelected. There is one question in the poll which I think is a very strong indicator that the senator has some homework to do here in Louisiana. And if I can refer to it real quickly, it says, when voters were asked which was more important, keeping Senator Landrieu in office due to her seniority or electing somebody new, 56% of the people surveyed said that they wanted somebody new, and only 37% wanted to keep her in office. Now, when you consider the fact that President Obama is extremely unpopular in Louisiana, the new health care law is extremely unpopular in Louisiana, and she has been a big supporter of both the president as well as the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. It means that for her to get reelected, you would think she's going to have to shift to all the great things and her seniority that she's done for Louisiana and her seniority. And according to this survey, the voters aren't going to listen to that. So she's got a real mountain to climb, and I suspect you're going to see that.
Oh, okay. Now, I'm showing on the screen right now the U.S. Senate election and related issues, and just talking about that race right now. Bill Cassidy's got a very favorable at 16%, and he's the number one candidate. Landrieu has 32.1. The unfavorables, at least some favorables for Cassidy, is 34. Now Landrieu gets some favorable 17. So does that mean that in terms of the favorables and unfavorables, putting those together, that Cassidy comes up with a little bit over 50.4, whereas Landrieu comes up with 39.1? And am I correct about that? And the Tea Party candidate Rob Maness has 12.6. If you look at just those numbers alone.
Well, I'm letting Jim Brown here chiming in to Steve. I see on what's on the screen shows Mary Landrieu with 30%, 32% very favorable, and a 17% some favorable. So 37 and 7, you put those together, and your favorable's over 50%. It's a pretty good number. But like you, as Lawrence enunciated well, with the Affordable Care Act, the president's unpopularity, I'm surprised that Landrieu is doing as well as she's doing, quite frankly. I thought she'd be a little further on down the line. I think one of the keys is that Bill Cassidy, who happens to be my congressman living up here in Baton Rouge, has yet really to define himself. It's basically been attack, but nobody knows anything about Bill Cassidy. And he's got a pretty compelling story to tell. He's a doctor, liver specialist. His wife's a doctor. Now, maybe that'll come out as we get into the paid media, but the fact remains right now that Cassidy just hasn't gotten much traction, although he's been running for over a year. And so Landrieu is floundering. There's no doubt about that. But let me tell you what. If you go back over the years, Landrieu flounders at every election. She never wins by more than a little over 50%. She's kind of in the same situation she was 6 years ago and 6 years before that. So what I think that poll shows is that Landrieu is kind of hanging on with a lot of negative, but the Republicans, in my opinion, have not done a very good job of zeroing in on one candidate and coalescing this race. Again, we got a year to go. There's a long, long way to go. But it's still very much in flux, and Landrieu's numbers, quite frankly, are about what they've always been. It's just a question of up until this time in every election, there's not been that real shining candidate out there that that really ran against the establishment and had a very articulate message. She's never faced that kind of opponent before. And so a lot of people speculated that maybe Bobby Jindal would run before the lusters kind of come off of him. I was with some Landrieu people last week. They kind of hoped Jindal would decide to run. They think he'd be very easy to define him. So a lot of flux in this race, as there has been in every situation. Landrieu's where she kind of always is. I think the uncertainty for the Republicans is that right now they don't have a candidate after a year of hard campaigning that really has a coalescing message that is drawing a lot of people to him.
Let me throw some out to you. I just happened to notice that Rob Menes, again, Colonel Rob Menes, who's I think very fine person, although he's to me at least he's more to the right than I think than I am at least, and that's sort of an understatement. But the whole thing is that he's got 33% of people who are not familiar with him. Cassidy's got 22%. So, those numbers are pretty close. Yet Rob Menes is lower teens, around 10, 11%. And Cassidy is 36% or so. Am I correct?
Yeah. Menes is a very attractive candidate. I've talked to him before, and he's been on
very nice guy.
He's been on my national radio show, and I've visited with him personally. Very impressive guy, and if you look at the results of that 5th District congressional race, and I believe a lot of it was just anti-incumbent. The fellow that lost the race, a senator up there, Neil Reiser, kind of became the incumbent with all the Republican establishment coalescing around him. Menes is kind of running as the anti-establishment candidate, has Tea Party support, but articulate guy and a real decent guy. Problem is he hadn't been able to raise any money. If Menes could raise a couple of $1 million, quite frankly, I think he'd be a threat to move Cassidy aside and would be a much stronger candidate against Landrieu than Cassidy. It looks like he is so far. But the problem is when you've got the parties pouring so much money in, it's just an uphill fight for him to raise any significant money.
Lawrence, what do you think about the fact that at this point in time, the national Republicans, like Jim Brown is saying, are pouring money into, at least they look more like they're trying to defeat Landrieu than, say, support Cassidy. That's the way I look at it, at least. But they have this guy, Menes, who is actually, he is coming out against Cassidy as much as he's going against Landrieu, it seems. So, what do you do about that?
Well, let me say this. To the average guy on the street, this election is millenniums away. We are politically oriented. We've been in politics our whole lives. I certainly have, and Jim basically has, and I think you follow politics for as long as you can remember. We pay attention to these things. We even talk about the presidential race in 2016. And yet, for the average person right now, this is way off in the future. Let me say this. I am one of those folks who has said that, in my opinion, until her opponents show me something better than what I've seen so far, I still believe Mary Landrieu is going to be reelected. Now, what this survey says is that in the theoretical world of polling for an election which is still just about a year away, she's in trouble, and I don't think anybody really disputes that fact. She always runs a close race. She's never won a race with any kind of big, sizable margin. As far as the two Republican candidates are concerned, Dr. Cassidy has not done a good job to this point of defining himself. In fact, I think he's got a lot of work ahead of him to do. But that can be done with television. That can be done with enough money. There's every reason to believe that he will get enough money. The third candidate, though, Bob Manassas, he could be the upset in this whole thing. But as Jim indicated, he's got to have money. He's got to have some dollars behind him, and he cannot be a radical Tea Party right-winger. Because if he is, and I don't know the fellow, I've never met him. Jim says he has, and you have. I have not met him, and I'm sure he's a fine gentleman.
Yes, he is.
But if he's a radical, as we saw in Missouri and Indiana, I believe, where some very extreme Tea Party candidates ran, and I think Arizona may have been another. It was Arizona was another example. Those were races that the Republicans could have won last time, but because they nominated candidates who were too far to the right, those candidates lost. So this race is yet to be run. This race is yet to be defined. But what this poll indicates is, number one, that yes, Mary Landrieu is in deep trouble. Number two, if she wraps herself around President Obama and wraps herself around the Affordable Care Act, at this point in time, that's a huge mistake because the voters of Louisiana don't like the president's not popular, and the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is not popular either. What's it going to be 6-7 months from now? That's a lifetime in politics, and we don't know. If by some miracle, people become happy with the registration on the internet, they're happy to have health insurance through the exchanges, then the Obamacare will take a whole different turn. We don't know that, but in today's world, it is a problem for Mary Landrieu.
But from a political standpoint, and Jim, you've run a lot of campaigns. At this point in time, we're a year away, and certainly Lawrence has articulated that time is a major factor in any kind of election. But you're talking about raising money, and you're looking at Cassidy within 5 points of Landrieu, as I understand. And you talk about the Rob Menace being down roughly 1/4 of what Landrieu has. So in terms of raising money, I mean certainly Menace is getting support from national conservatives. But is he able to raise the money? I mean, like in North Louisiana, you had McAllister, who basically had his own money, and he was able to win Congress.
And Steve, that's what you find, that independent candidates that I think can be very appealing under this climate, running against both parties, saying, look, neither party has served us well up in Washington, D.C. Look, the Republic can'ts and the Demo don'ts, and there's so many really challenging things you could do out there to take on both people, especially when you've got Cassidy, who's a congressman. You can say, look, they're both part of the problem. Get rid of them both. The successful candidates, and I think that's going to be a strong message you're going to see a lot of. But you got to have the dollars, and as you said, McAllister put in up in the 5th congressional district, my old hometown. I ran for that congressional seat in 1978. Most of your viewers don't remember that, and I think I had a hard time scraping together a couple of $100,000 total. McAllister put well over $800,000 of his own money into the race for a congressional district in a poor area with just 1 or 2 TV markets. So that's Manas's problem. $2 million for Rob Manas, and I think he could be the spoiler, as Lawrence referred to, and could quite frankly be a very viable candidate to win this thing, just as McAllister was running as the outsider, the non-incumbent up in the 5th district. But where do you get that money in a U.S. Senate race when you don't have it yourself? Boy, that's a real huge uphill fight, and I don't think, quite frankly, he's going to be able to do it. What he can do is wound Cassidy a good bit by beating up on Cassidy, turning off a number of Republicans or more conservatives, so when you get into the runoff with Cassidy and Landrieu, you won't have much of a turnout option, and that's where it's all going to come down to. In that McCollister race, for example, there was 17% turnout, 7% African-American turnout. Well, if Mary Landrieu gets 7% African-American turnout, she's toast. So the dynamics of such depend on Manis beating up on Cassidy is what Landrieu's hoping for, and then what kind of a turnout will show up there. And right now, it's a crapshoot, as Lawrence said. It's anybody's race. It's a long one way to go. Landrieu is in trouble. If the right kind of, I would say Congressman Boustany, for example, would have been a better candidate. Steve Scalise would have probably been a better candidate. But Cassidy so far has just not gelled with the public and build the kind of base you would expect when you've got this election that's about 11 months away.
Well, he hasn't gelled with the conservatives, I believe. I think that's really what's happening. That's why Manis is doing as well in terms of 10%. The conservatives just haven't embraced them. I just got an email the other day from a friend of mine, and he's a Tea Party person, and he was talking about, I think, saying Boustany and Bonner are traitors. And there's I guess a movement afoot among Tea Party types who are saying, look, these guys are traitors, and so they need to be defeated. So they didn't mention Cassidy, but Cassidy certainly, has been casted as being, a quote, say, former Democrat who gave money to Blanco. Jim probably gave money to you too, huh? As a Democrat.
Actually, I think he told me he did way back a long time ago. And he used to be a Democrat.
Yeah.
When he ran for the state senate, and I had him on my radio show in Baton Rouge, I didn't think he had a prayer of being state senator. I felt sorry for him, but I put him on just because I knew his family and respected the fact that he was a liver doctor, did a lot of volunteer work, real decent guy. But
sure.
I didn't think he had a prayer in the state senate race. Won a big race, and quite frankly, says he's going to win this one. So the sleeper, by the way, in this thing is, Lawrence talked about Bobby Jindal. It would be Jindal, in spite of his unpopularity, has got a year to kind of get all around the state. When you're the incumbent governor, as we've witnessed over the years, you've got a tremendous base for you. Jindal could beat Mary Landrieu. I'm convinced Jindal would beat Mary Landrieu. If he came on back home, retouched base, started becoming accessible, I think with the power of incumbency behind him, the money he could raise, he could win this race. But he is so, I don't want to use the word paranoid or delusional, quite frankly, about the fact that he thinks he has these national ambitions, and I just don't see it. And I don't think that the people I've talked to outside of the state see it. But if he ever pulled in his focus and said, if I want a political future, I better find myself a base, it'd be the U.S. Senate. I think he could win that race. But right now, boy, he just seems to be ignoring all the signs of how Chris Christie, by staying at home, is the most popular governor in America, and Bobby Jindal, who never stays at home, has one of the lowest ratings popularity-wise of any governor in America. It's just something that doesn't get through to the guy.